Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. House passes a Republican bill to increase the debt ceiling and cut federal spending after late-night changes designed to get the last few Republican holdouts on board. Those changes including restoring some tax credits for biofuels and moving up the start date for work requirements for social welfare programs like food stamps and Medicaid. The vote in the House, a close 217 to 215 strict party line. Coming up, we'll get the latest from the House Republican leadership and the Democratic opposition, and we'll talk with Politico economics reporter Eleanor Mueller. President Joe Biden hosting the South Korean president for a state visit, an elaborate White House arrival ceremony, plus an Oval Office meeting, a joint news conference, and a state dinner. The news conference included questions about how to counter North Korea's nuclear weapons program and computer chip manufacturing policy in the U.S., South Korea, and China. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson officially entering the race for the Republican nomination for president, promising to get the economy back on track. And when it comes to foreign policy, saying there are some who want the U.S. to disengage from the world and to isolate ourselves. Isolationism only leads to weakness, and weakness leads to war. President of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, defending her union against Republican accusations of some undue influence on school closing and reopening policy during the COVID-19 pandemic. She testified before a House subcommittee. Bipartisan Senate bill introduced to prohibit children under 13 from creating social media accounts on platforms such as Facebook and TikTok. And a Supreme Court case brought by a 94-year-old woman from Minnesota after she lost her condo due to unpaid taxes, claiming the county sold the condo, kept all the money, and that violates the Constitution's prohibition on the taking of private property for public use without just compensation. And now to the House and that bill to raise the debt ceiling $1.5 trillion and reduce the federal budget by an estimated $4.8 trillion over 10 years through limiting discretionary spending increases to 1% a year, rescinding unused COVID-19 relief funding, and rescinding the extra IRS funding. Bill also puts in place new work requirements for public aid programs like Medicaid and food stamps, and increases domestic oil and gas production. Here is the vote on the House floor.
Yeas are 217, the nays are 215. The bill is passed.
It was a party line vote, Republicans voting yes, Democrats voting no. There were 4 Republican no votes: Matt Gaetz from Florida, Ken Buck from Colorado, Andy Biggs from Arizona, Tim Burchett from Tennessee. And the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy could only afford to lose 4 votes. If all the Democrats voted no, all the Republicans voted yes. As it turns out, a few members did not vote. From Associated Press, facing a revolt from Midwestern Republicans over doing away with biofuel tax credits that were just passed into law last year by President Joe Biden, GOP House members relented and allowed the tax credits to stay on the books. Republicans also agreed to more quickly launch the bolstered work requirements for recipients of government aid starting in 2024. One of the Midwestern Republicans, Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin, spoke to reporters outside a meeting room this morning, House Republicans talking about the revised bill.
What your thoughts are on the changes overnight to the debt limit bill, and if this will be enough to get it through?
I will tell you this, that there's a lot of people in leadership positions that have never had to actually lead. And by having those provisions removed, Kevin McCarthy and the rest of the Republican conference have showed nothing but leadership. The country's in crisis right now, and we need leadership. And that's what was demonstrated last night. I've led men and women in combat, and it's hard. And Kevin is doing the hard work, and the rest of our conference are doing the hard work to make sure that our farmers are being taken care of. So food security is national security. Is not some like gitchy little catchphrase. It's reality. And the thing that people don't seem to understand or recognize is that biofuels are essentially dual-use technology, because you can actually eat corn and you can turn it into fuel. So the corn in our nation, it doesn't just fuel our nation, it feeds our people. And that was a difficult decision, I'm sure, for Kevin, Speaker McCarthy, and the rest of the folks to make. I'm very proud that he's our speaker. He's actually demonstrating leadership. And the people on the Democrat side should really wake up here, because the usurpations of our constitutionally dictated authorities as members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican, have been repeatedly tramped upon by the Biden administration, as exhibited by his vetoing of the bipartisan bicameral resolution trying to get rid of the rules changes for the waters of the United States, which are a clear assault on American farming.
Congressman Derek Van Orden, Republican from Wisconsin, speaking with reporters this morning outside the room in the U.S. Capitol building where House Republicans were meeting to talk about the debt limit increase and spending cut bill. Also after that meeting, the House Republican leaders holding their own news conference, Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana getting questions about the negotiations and the changes to the bill to win over those remaining few needed House Republicans.
This is kind of the dress rehearsal for what comes later this summer when the Senate gets a hold of this, and then also what happens with the president. With that concern, though, if it's that hard to get your side in order and not have to do this last-minute maneuver, what does that portend for the summer, and does that give confidence to the markets in this process?
I wouldn't call it hard as much as thoughtful. There has been a lot of hard work that's gone into how best to start this negotiation. Speaker McCarthy, again, over 2 months ago, did get the opportunity to sit down with President Biden. It would be a lot easier if Democrats were actually part of this conversation. You know, the American people have been part of this for a long time because they do this every day in their household. They figure out how to make ends meet with the dollars that they take in. This federal government, under President Biden, when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were running everything for the last 2 years, have gotten us to a point that for every $100 that comes in, the government is spending $129. You can't keep doing that. And so we would really like it. It'd be a lot easier if President Biden was sitting at the table with the speaker saying, okay, let's come up with ideas of how to solve this problem. But because they walked away from the table, we said, we're not going to just sit back and run the clock out like President Biden. We're going to do it on our own. And so this bill represents a lot of really good ideas. If they've got better ideas, as Chairman Arrington said, not one idea was presented by Democrats yesterday. Not one concern for the young people of America who will pay this tab was expressed by Democrats. But we care about that.
Speaking of the changes that were made last night where you were Chairman Arrington, regards to like the biofuel credits, how that impacted the overall bill, if it did, and also where there still
there were some technical changes to address dates and alignment. If you look at the tax credits, for example, in the initial draft, it repealed all of the tax credits, but some of those tax credits were not part of the IRA, that legislation. Some were actually in place before that, so the intention wasn't to get rid of all of those, just the ones that were created in the IRA. And if you look at the scoring, it was really focused on that. So those clarifications were made to address that. Then on the work requirements, if you looked, there were three main components, SNAP, TANF. Not all of them aligned up on the same dates of implementation, so we wanted to make sure they all aligned on the same dates of implementation.
The House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference this morning before the House floor debate and votes on that bill. The House Democrats holding their own news conference. Richard Neal of Massachusetts, ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, which handles taxes, trade, and Medicare, talking about the Democratic position.
George Bush cut taxes by $1.3 trillion in 2001 and came back with another $1 trillion. There was subsequent invasion of Iraq, 1.5 million new veterans that have been created because of these military incursions that we've had. And we're obligated, for obvious and good reason, to pay those veterans benefits and for those who have been wounded or harmed along the way. But back to arithmetic. So they voted for the pandemic relief. They have voted consistently for more defense spending. Some of them voted for the CHIPS Act. Some of them voted for the infrastructure bill. And all of them in 2017, December, voted to borrow $2.3 trillion. Borrowed $2.3 trillion to provide tax cuts to the wealthiest amongst us. There have been $10 trillion worth of tax cuts over the last 25 years. And there has been no conversation from their side about putting the tax cuts on the table. So Speaker McCarthy got himself into this. And I think reasonable people would come to the conclusion that we should have a clear and sustained vote on the debt ceiling. and then we should begin the process of discussion and or negotiation as we're compelled. When I look at what this says to international markets, what I think it does in terms of the credibility of the United States in paying our bills, the full faith and credit of the United States becomes really important. So if you look at this dollar, the one thing we know about this dollar is that in international markets, it's always redeemed. No matter where you travel in the world, if you put the dollar on the table, if you're not in euro or you're not in sterling, that dollar will be redeemed. You can put it out, and they might say, well, we can't take it right now, but we can give you change in that currency. But the point is that this is a threat to the full faith and credit of the United States. Why they would choose to use this mechanism of the debt ceiling to try and compel negotiations escapes me. They have voted for all the measures that I've just pointed out. And now they want us to have sort of amnesia and say that all of a sudden this was created because Joe Biden became president.
Congressman Richard Neal, Democrat from Massachusetts, Ways and Means Committee ranking member at a news conference today. Eleanor Mueller, congressional economics reporter for Politico, has been following the debate on the House Republican bill that would increase the debt ceiling and reduce federal spending. Joining us now by phone. Thank you for being here. The House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, has been cutting some last-minute deals trying to get the final House Republican votes to pass the bill. What were the specifics? What were they talking about?
So they talked about a number of things, all of which were aimed at appeasing holdouts who were threatening to oppose the bill. You know, most notable, I think, are language that would tighten rules on social safety net programs. So instead of starting stricter requirements in the fall of next year, constraints would kick in, much sooner on programs like SNAP, which provide people with food stamps, and other safety net programs. So basically tightening those work requirements and then also rescinding large swaths of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law last summer. And that was the Biden administration's clean energy bill that put a lot of money towards clean energy projects.
This bill passing the House is just the first step, and it took some doing to get to this point. How is the Senate going to approach this, and has the White House changed its position?
The White House really has refused to engage on this, as has the Senate. And so I think House Republicans are looking at this as the first step in their conversation. They're saying that this is what's going to start the conversation with those in the Senate, those in the White House, and then they can hopefully go from there in terms of, having a real conversation about how to reform spending while also not defaulting on our debt.
You've written a story that begins for months. Wall Street has barely focused on the possibility that the government might default on its debt. It's paying attention now. How much are they paying attention?
Yeah, well, we are seeing them start to, I think, panic a little bit. And I know that some on the Hill, certainly many that I've spoken to were surprised that it took Wall Street until now to get to this point. I think for a while, maybe longer than anticipated, they were happy to sit on the sidelines and say, you'll figure this out. We're confident you'll figure it out. And then honestly, over the last, week or so, we've seen executives start to say, what if they don't figure it out? And I think Democrats are happy to see that too. You know what I mean? I think that they have been of the opinion that we're not going to get real pressure on Republicans to lift the debt ceiling to avoid it defaulting on the debt until Wall Street, kind of puts the pressure on them, puts the heat on them to do so.
We're talking with Eleanor Mueller from Politico. As you have been covering this on Capitol Hill, how have you done that? What has been the focus? Who have you been talking to?
I've been talking to a lot of, House Republicans. I mean, those are the ones who are making a lot of the decisions here. And it's been fascinating because a lot of different factions of the party have not always been looking for the same thing. We saw a lot of Republicans who had concerns about, losing jobs, for example, in their states that were created by these clean energy tax credits. We saw House Republicans who were a little concerned about work requirements on things like food stamps and Medicaid. And then on the other side of the conversation, we saw a lot of Republicans who actually thought that initial proposal did not go far enough. And that's what those changes that were made, last night and this morning did. They made those provisions even more stringent. And so it's been a real push and pull, I think, between the different members of this party in the House GOP and what their constituents want and, what they want to deliver for them.
And a process question, I saw a headline that it took just about 100 days before House Republicans had to go against their pledge to use regular order, that this bill never went through the appropriations process.
Yeah, no, it did not. It did not. The House Rules Committee marked it up last night. They just, earlier Wednesday passed the rule to consider the bill, but it never came through, a committee. It was never considered by any of the House committees.
So after today, what happens next?
I think that House Republicans are really banking that Biden will be happy to come to the table and have this conversation with them about the kinds of spending reforms that they would like to see, and that realistically, they can't deliver on without a Democratic sign-off. And in part thanks to, the fact that Biden's in control of the White House and Democrats are in control of the Senate.
Eleanor Mueller, congressional reporter covering economics for Politico. Find her stories at Politico.com, and on Twitter, it's at Eleanor_Mueller. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On Wall Street, the Dow down 228, NASDAQ up 55, S&P down 15. Welcome ceremony on the South Lawn of the White House for the state visit by the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, the U.S. Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. And also there, the Korean American Children's Choir from the Korean School of New Jersey singing a traditional Korean folk song. CNN reports that President Biden is welcoming President Yoon to the White House for the full pomp and circumstance and hospitality of an official state visit, a high-stakes meeting amid ongoing provocations from North Korea, China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region, and a recent leak of Pentagon documents. The article continues that the two announced a key new agreement at the White House on Wednesday that aims to deter North Korean aggression, including a new U.S. commitment to deploy a nuclear-armed submarine in South Korea for the first time since the early 1980s. In a joint news conference at the White House, President Biden hailed what he called the ironclad alliance between the two countries, and he called South Korea the linchpin of regional security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. C-SPAN covered that joint news conference. The first question to President Biden was about trade, specifically semiconductors, not only to South Korea but to China. And the question to President Yoon was the nuclear threat from North Korea.
First question is from Courtney of the Los Angeles Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your top economic priority has been to build up U.S. domestic manufacturing in competition with China. But your rules against expanding chip manufacturing in China is hurting South Korean companies that rely heavily on Beijing. Are you damaging a key ally in the competition with China to help your domestic politics ahead of the election? And one for President Yoon. There have been concerns since last year that North Korea will soon be conducting its 7th nuclear test amid growing domestic support in your country for your own nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Russia has suggested it could send its latest weapons to North Korea if South Korea sends lethal aid to Ukraine. How do you seek to manage the North Korea risk amid obligations to Ukraine and NATO? Thank you.
Let me respond to your question first. My desire to increase U.S. manufacturing and jobs in America is not about China. I'm not concerned about China. Remember, America invented the semiconductor. We invented it. We used to have 40% of the market. And we decided that what we're going to do over the past, I don't know how many decades, we decided that it was going to be cheaper to export jobs and import product. And along came the pandemic. And the pandemic taught us that we used to have, as I said, 40% of the market just some years ago. Now it's down to 10%. And again, we invented the supercomputer. So I decided to go out and see what we could do to increase our hold on the market once again. And so what I did was I went around the country, as well as, in addition to passing the CHIPS and Science Act, I, in fact, visited countries around the world. And two significant South Korean companies decided they were going to invest billions of dollars in chip manufacturing in the United States. It wasn't designed to hurt China. It was designed so we didn't have to worry about whether or not we had access to semiconductors. For example, during the pandemic, what happened was all of a sudden everybody started to learn the phrase supply chain. A year ago, no one knew what the hell everybody was talking about when he said supply chain. But now they all know. And we lost access to these semiconductors, in which new automobiles in the United States need 30,000 of them just to build a new automobile. And we didn't have them. So we started to invest here. And what happened was when we encouraged the investment through the CHIPS and Science Act, and now we have enormous investment in the United States, well over $200 billion in long-term investment in semiconductors. And we're rebuilding the economy of the United States with those semiconductors. It's not designed to hurt China. The only thing I did say with regard to China, there are certain extremely sophisticated semiconductors that we have built that are useful for nuclear and or other weapon systems. Those we are not selling, we're not exporting to China or anyone else. And so that's the context in which this has all occurred. In the meantime, we're creating thousands of jobs and bringing back a sense of pride and dignity to so many towns in the country where all of a sudden, over the last 3 decades, we found out that factory that had 600 people shut down. The soul of that community was lost. And so I made sure when the semiconductors were coming back that they were not just going to go to the coast, they'd be all over the country. And so we have a significant field of dreams outside of in Ohio, outside of Columbus. We're in Texas, we're in Arizona, anyway, they're all over the country. So it's not viewed to hurt anyone else. We are providing access to those semiconductors. We're a supply chain you can count on. But we are not going to sit back and be in a position where we don't have access to those semiconductors. We are not going to be a place where we're the end of that line. We're the beginning of it. And it's generating significant economic growth in America and not hurting anybody. And by the way, it's creating jobs in South Korea. It's creating jobs in South Korea, not just with SK, but anyway, with Samsung and other industries. So I think it's a win-win.
With regard to your question, let me provide my answer. Korea and the U.S., based on its Washington Declaration, our two countries have agreed to strengthen extended deterrence, and the implementation level is different from the past. First of all, we have an NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group, that has been launched that will implement discussions and actions, and we will hold regular meetings and consultations under NCG. We will share information on mutual nuclear assets and intelligence, and we will jointly plan responses and also jointly plan exercises and drills and implementation plans. So all of these will be strengthened and specified under the Nuclear Consultative Group. We want to customize our response against North Korea's nuclear threat based on extended deterrence. And in the process of achieving this goal, any concerns that Koreans may have against North Korean nuclear weapons will be relieved, I believe. If nuclear weapons are used, our two countries will strengthen our response in a swift manner.
The interpreter for the South Korean President, Yoon Suk-yeol, joining President Joe Biden at a joint news conference in the White House Rose Garden, the South Korean president making a state visit to the United States. Back to the Associated Press article on this state visit. President Yoon's visit comes just weeks after the leaks of scores of highly classified documents that have complicated relations with allies, including South Korea. The papers viewed by the Associated Press indicate that South Korea's National Security Council grappled with the U.S. in early March over an American request to provide artillery ammunition to Ukraine. The document, which cited a signals intelligence report, said then NSC Director Kim Sung-han suggested the possibility of selling the 330,000 rounds of 155mm munitions to Poland, since getting the ammunition to Ukraine quickly was the United States' ultimate goal. That from AP. President Yoon was asked today about the classified documents leak from the Pentagon.
Did the recent leaks revealing that the U.S. was spying on South Korea come up at all in your discussions? And did President Biden provide you any assurances?
With regard to that, we are communicating between our two countries and we are sharing necessary information. I believe that investigation is underway in the United States. So various and complex variables are always in play. We need time to wait for the investigation results by the United States, and we plan to continue to communicate on the matter.
The South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol through an interpreter in the White House Rose Garden joint news conference with President Biden. Part of the state visit is a state dinner at the White House tonight. This is the second state visit hosted by President Biden. The first was French President Emmanuel Macron 5 months ago. And the last state visit to the U.S. by a South Korean leader was 12 years ago. On Thursday, President Yoon will be addressing a joint meeting of Congress. We'll have live coverage Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern, here on C-SPAN Radio. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From CBS News, former Arkansas Governor ASA Hutchinson formally launched his long-shot bid for the Republican Party's 2024 presidential nomination on Wednesday, making the case that his mettle has been tested and he's ready to take on President Biden. The former governor, congressman, administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and border security official had previously said he would run for president and formally launch his campaign with a speech in Bentonville, Arkansas, his birthplace. That from CBS News. Here is ASA Hutchinson.
Today, I am announcing that I am a candidate for President of the United States. In this campaign for president, I stand alone in terms of my experience, my record, and leadership. From Congress to the DEA to Homeland Security, I have served our country in times of crisis. As governor of Arkansas, we cut taxes and created record surpluses. We increased pay for teachers. We reduced regulations, we recruited industry, and the private sector grew by over 100,000 jobs. My mettle has been tested. It was tested when I put on a flak jacket and assisted the FBI hostage rescue team in negotiating the surrender of an armed terrorist group. My mettle was tested after the 9/11 attack, when I was responsible for protecting the United States from another act of terrorism on U.S. soil. And my mettle was tested once more as governor, when I demonstrated how we can lead through a pandemic without closing down every business and shutting down our schools. When I had pressure from Washington and the national media to shelter in place, I said no. And the result was that our businesses survived and prospered, and we had more days of in-classroom instruction in our schools during the pandemic than almost any other state. And yes, that's right, we beat Florida and Texas. This campaign is about courage. It is about making the tough decisions to rebuild our economy, to give peace a chance through America's strength, and to renew the American spirit of freedom, opportunity, and the rule of law.
ASA Hutchinson, former governor of Arkansas, at his campaign launch today in Bentonville, Arkansas, becoming a Republican presidential candidate. More from the CBS News article on this event. Asa Hutchinson, 72 years old, focused his remarks on his and President Biden's records rather than taking aim at potential and declared GOP candidates. His campaign faces a steep uphill climb given Republican voters' continued support for former President Donald Trump. Asa Hutchinson did not mention Donald Trump in his remarks on Wednesday, but has been one of the few Republicans willing to criticize the former president, who enjoys a large lead in GOP primary polls. That from CBS News. We talked about Asa Hutchinson's run with Roby Brock, editor-in-chief of Talk Business and Politics, a news site based in Arkansas.
What are his areas of interest, his policy areas of interest, and where do you think his I guess you'd say lane is in terms of getting the nomination, the Republican nomination in 2024?
So he's going to clearly run in the anti-Donald Trump lane. He has been a voice against Trump since the January 6th insurrection and everything that has come out from that. That's where you've seen Asa Hutchinson really lift his profile nationally when he was the head of the National Governors Association. So I think you'll hear a lot of rhetoric from him, again, about how the Republican Party needs to, recenter itself and find itself again away from this negativity that he sees from the Trump side of the party. I think on policy, you're going to see him talk a lot about jobs. In Arkansas, he has a pretty good record on jobs. He also was big into computer science. He really, probably 25-fold increased the number of computer science students and teachers in Arkansas. That was a big victory for him in terms of policy. And in the Republican primary, I think you'll see him talk a lot about the Second Amendment. I think you'll see him talk a lot about his pro-life stance. He has been pretty unwavering on those points throughout his political career, even when it wasn't politically popular. So in a Republican primary, those are two things I think you'll see him anchor himself to pretty tightly. And in Iowa, those will be some good issues for him to hang his hat on.
What's interesting, you mentioned, he reminded us of him being the impeachment manager in the Clinton impeachment, his fellow Arkansan Bill Clinton. Are there any, and it may be an imperfect analogy, but are there any comparisons to the way that Bill Clinton campaigned and tried to govern, that middle way comparison? Is Asa Hutchinson seeking to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of points on that. I mean, I think Asa Hutchinson did govern from the center right, very pragmatically as governor for 8 years, which was a bit unexpected based on his previous track record of hardcore Republican Party politics. He really found consensus on a lot of things, which is very similar to what Bill Clinton did in his terms as governor as well as U.S. president. And I think that Asa Hutchinson, to give you another Clinton analogy here, you'll remember when Clinton came into national prominence in the 1990s, he really moved the Democratic Party from the left to the center with the Democratic Leadership Council. I think Asa Hutchinson is trying a similar message with Republicans in this election cycle. It's like we've gotten too far to the extreme on the right, and we've got to find our way back to Main Street, business conservative kind of values. I think you'll see some of his rhetoric try to pull the party back from the brink of where he sees it in these days.
Roby Brock is editor-in-chief of Talk Business and Politics, which is based in Arkansas, joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program. Part of our campaign 2024 coverage. You can find the full announcement today from Asa Hutchinson running for president on our website at cspan.org, along with the events from the other declared and potential candidates. The Montana House of Representatives voting today to punish Democratic State Representative Zoe Zephyr, who is transgender, in response to what happened on the House floor and in the gallery Monday, which was a protest against her not being allowed to speak for several days, which was when the Montana Speaker responded to Representative Zephyr saying during debate earlier on a bill that would ban gender-affirming care for minors that she hoped those who voted in favor would see their, quote, blood on their hands. Well, the formal punishment decided today bans Zoe Zephyr from attending or speaking during floor sessions. She'll be allowed to vote remotely in the remaining days of the legislative session. Representative Zephyr was allowed to speak today.
I have had friends who have taken their lives because of these bills. I have fielded calls from families in Montana, including one family whose trans teenager attempted to take her life while watching a hearing on one of the anti-trans bills. And in that hearing, our caucus pleaded with the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee to not allow certain testimony, to keep decorum. And we were told a lot of people have a lot of opinions on these things. So when I rose up and said, there is blood on your hands, I was not being hyperbolic. I was speaking to the real consequences of the votes that we as legislators take in this body. And when the Speaker asks me to apologize, what he is, on behalf of decorum, what he is really asking me to do is be silent when my community is facing bills that get us killed.
Montana State Representative Zoe Zephyr today. State Representative Casey Knudsen, a Republican, supported the punishment for Zoe Zephyr.
Our state constitution, our House rules, and Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure all reinforce the fact that this House, this body, holds dear the right to self-protection. We today are exercising this right based on the inappropriate behavior on the House floor of the representative from House District 100 on April 24, 2023. This behavior violated the collective rights and safety of 99 other members of this body, our staff, our pages, and the public. And based on this showing of good cause, I would recommend a yes vote on the motion to discipline the representative from House District 100.
Montana State Representative Casey Knudsen on the State House floor in the capital city, Helena. Again, Zoe Zephyr has been banned from attending or speaking during floor sessions, only allowed to vote remotely for the remaining days of the session. The vote today in the Republican-controlled State House of Montana was 68-32. Back in Washington, D.C., President of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, testifying today before the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic about her union's role during the COVID-19 pandemic, guidance for schools coming out of the federal government. This is from a Fox News article. Communications obtained by the New York Post through a Freedom of Information Act request by conservative group Americans for Public Trust showed numerous emails between top CDC officials and the AFT just days before the Biden administration released the school reopening guidelines in February 2021. The lobbying efforts were a reported success, as the Post found at least two instances when suggestions were used nearly word for word within the CDC's guidelines. The CDC had been prepared to allow in-school instruction regardless of transmission rates. But at the suggestion of the union, the guidelines were adjusted to include a provision that said, in the event of high community transmission results from a new variant of SARS-CoV-2, a new update of these guidelines may be necessary. That reporting from Fox News. Here's a portion of today's hearing with the AFT President Randy Weingarten, questioned by the subcommittee chair, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, Republican from Ohio.
Before the operational strategy was finished, AFT advocated for a school closure trigger. That's the word in your documents. On January 29, 2021, in notes prepared for you before a call with the CDC, your staff recommended pushing the CDC for a trigger, stating, we need an objective metric for closure, ... triggers. Then on February 11, 2021, following the need to push on a closure trigger, a member of the AFT staff emails Director Walensky directly and says, "We must, however, urge inclusion of clear closure triggers in the imminent guidance." Again, on February 11, 2021, in an email from your staff, they state, "Our emphasis will follow Randy's statement, push on needing a closure trigger." Then in a February 12, 2021 email from you to members, you mentioned the CDC did not install a trigger, stating, "While the CDC guidance does not contain a closure trigger, the guidance indicates schools may temporarily close to in-person learning." In that same newsletter, in bold font, the CDC is not mandating the reopening of schools. Why was that in bold? Why was that to be emphasized?
So which of these questions do you want me to answer?
I'm asking, well, I gave statements that we have documents on. What I'm asking is why was that statement in bold? The statement that says the CDC is not mandating the reopening of schools. Why would that be in bold?
I have no idea.
Thank you. Usually means some type of emphasis, I would think, but you don't.
I mean,
recall. You don't recall. That's fine.
By
this point, though, schools.
Sir, what I did was, if I may, the document I did write was our press release that day, which you're not referring to, where I said that the CDC has met fear with evidence and that we were embracive of the fact that they had clear science-backed evidence so that we could actually reopen schools more forcefully than had happened before.
Yeah, by this point, schools had been shown to not be a driver of community transmission. Children were not nearly as at risk as the elderly. Children rarely transmitted to adults. But despite all this science, AFT still wanted to install some way to automatically close schools, which deviates from the narrative of doing everything we can to get them open.
Well, actually,
I haven't asked the question.
Sorry,
yet. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
At any point in 2020, after science became clear, did the AFT push for a trigger to open schools rather than the clear push to have a trigger to close schools?
Yes, I did, sir. In fact, at the Cuomo Commission, which was in my testimony, the only commission that I actually sat on myself, we had triggers in that commission. And the reason we were asking for triggers, which is what the WHO had, about 9%, Cuomo Commission had 5 to 9%. The reason we were asking for triggers was for the same reasons as you were complaining about the CDC's February 2022 guidance as well, because we thought that what they had done with these 3 different tranches was confusing to people. We actually just wanted.
So I thank you.
We wanted a number because most of us are not scientists. So we wanted a number.
Randy Weingarten is president of AFT, American Federation of Teachers, testifying today before the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, questioned by the chair, Brad Wenstrup, Republican from Ohio. You can find the full committee on our video library at cspan.org. A bipartisan group of senators has introduced a bill to prohibit children under the age of 13 from creating social media accounts on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and require that 13 to 17-year-olds get a parent or guardian's permission first. CNN writes the proposed legislation aims to address what policymakers, mental health advocates, and critics of tech platforms say is a mental health crisis fueled by social media. One of the sponsors, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut.
The social media companies have had plenty of opportunity to do the right thing and to make sure that the content they are delivering to our kids is healthy. They have failed to deliver. I don't think it's a coincidence that the 4 of us are all raising young children today, because parents want and deserve tools to help keep their kids safe online. Today, they simply don't have those tools. This bill fixes that. This bill gives parents the ability to decide with their children when is the right time to step into this world. And by reserving these algorithms for individuals whose brains are ready to receive and deal with that content, we're also taking a really important step to protect the health of our kids online.
Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill, along with his co-sponsors of this bill they're introducing, the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act. Another senator there, Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama.
Enough is enough. The data speaks for itself. Over 50%, or just around that, of high school students have said that they are actually addicted in one way or another to social media. We look at the numbers referenced by Senator Schatz between the years of 2011 and 2019. Depression among our children has doubled. And in our high school, females, 1 in 3 have said that they have considered suicide. As someone who was a high school young woman at one point in her life, I can tell you how challenging that time is for anyone. But that was 25 years ago. If you add in the complications and the additional stressors and pressure of social media, it becomes too much for some to bear. This bill steps up and does what we need it to. It allows parents to be back a part of the conversation, and it also makes sure that big tech cannot prey on the emotions of our children.
Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, at a news conference today. The other two senators there, Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Brian Schatz from Hawaii, and Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Democrat, also there as they introduced this bill. More from the CNN article. Most major social media companies already bar kids younger than 13 from their platforms, the result of a federal children's privacy law known as COPPA, but enforcing the restriction has been a challenge. In what could be one of the most far-reaching changes to the technology landscape, the bill seeks to create a government-run age verification program that can certify users' ages or parental status based on identification they upload to the government system or to a third-party verifier. The Supreme Court hearing a case today involving a 94-year-old woman from Minnesota, Geraldine Tyler, who lost her one-bedroom condominium because of $15,000 in unpaid property taxes plus interest and penalties. Hennepin County sold the condo for $40,000 and kept all the money. She sued, claiming the excess $25,000 in home equity was property that the county took away from her without just compensation, in violation of the Constitution's Fifth Amendment. And also the county imposed an excessive fine in violation of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution. Here's some of the Supreme Court oral argument in this case, Tyler v. Hennepin County. Justice Clarence Thomas and Chief Justice John Roberts questioning Christina Martin, an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation representing Geraldine Tyler.
Normally, we see these takings claims when you have eminent domain or something that's traditional. So why should we extend it to areas such as forfeiture or taxation and the area of property taxes?
Because the right that we're asserting here is a deeply rooted right that a debt collector may not take more than what's owed. The way that debt collectors ordinarily get around that is by taking the property subject to that traditional common law rule. Blackstone called it an implied contract at law, that they would take the property, sell it in a fair arm's length transaction, usually by auction, and then return any excess after they pay off the debts.
Well, it's a deeply rooted right that's traditionally defined by state law. You know, in some places, your property line goes up to the high water mark. In other states, it goes to the low water mark. And when you take property there, it's wherever the state law has defined it. What if Minnesota has a law sort of going forward, and they say, from now on, in Minnesota, if you get property, you have to know that we, the state, are going to take it if you don't pay taxes for 3 years. And people go in with that expectation. The market value is discounted because of that. If the eventuality occurs, there's no taxes for 3 years, they take the property entirely. Is that a taking or not?
It's still a taking, Your Honor. I would point this court to its decision in Horn, which said that no one ever actually expects their real or personal property to be taken. And while the government can redefine the boundaries of property rights with things like statutes of limitations, what it can't do is outright confiscate property. Just like the court held in Phillips, there was a deeply rooted traditional right that while states had carved out exceptions through rules like the IOLTA programs, that nevertheless, the government would not be allowed to carve out the self-dealing exception.
Attorney Christina Martin with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and Chief Justice John Roberts asking the question. Oral argument today in the case Tyler v. Hennepin County, Minnesota. As for which way the court might rule, Associated Press writes, the Supreme Court seemed likely Wednesday to give a 94-year-old Minneapolis woman another day in court to try to recoup some money after the county kept the entire $40,000 when it sold her condominium over a small unpaid tax bill. Justices seem in broad agreement with arguments by the lawyer for Geraldine Tyler that Hennepin County, Minnesota violated the Constitution's prohibition on the taking of private property without just compensation. Some of the news from the Supreme Court: Chief Justice John Roberts respectfully declining a request from the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin to testify at a hearing next week about ethical standards on the court. Senator Durbin writing that there has been a steady stream of revelations regarding justices falling short of ethical standards expected of other federal judges. Recently, there was the ProPublica report on a close relationship between Justice Thomas and a conservative political donor. Chief Justice John Roberts writing back, testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee by the Chief Justice of the United States is exceedingly rare, as one might expect in light of separation of powers concerns and the importance of preserving judicial independence. He attached a statement on ethics, principles, and practices signed by all 9 justices. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.